Hey guys, and welcome to the fifth episode of the All Blue podcast. I am Kai with Yonas Abraham, our NA representative, as well as Hrvoje Rails Zero, our
So
European representative. In this episode, we're going to be talking about how OP11 mainly is going, our thoughts on the meta, as well as kind of how we, in a weird way, because I've also been testing OP11 for a guide that I've been writing, have been dealing with these new threats in the start deck 23 through 28. How are you guys doing?
doing great. Relatively midday over here in Vegas, getting ready for an upcoming regional, but I'm having a good time. How about you,
Yeah.
Hrvoje?
I'm also on a trip in Amsterdam. It's a little past midnight here, as per usual, and it was a really nice day. Just a fair bit of travel, but tomorrow is the regional.
Uh, That's very exciting for you guys. I'm just at home. But there is the Tokyo Championship tomorrow. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be playing in it, but I am going to be at side events. So at a hotel, ready to go to a regional tomorrow. So I guess the first thing to just kind of get off people's minds is what decks are you guys playing? Maybe starting with you, Roya.
I will be bringing green purple, which I've been bringing to like all the events since EBO2 came out. I still think the deck is like it has this inherent consistency that other decks don't have, but while it's also like high power, and I just like that kind of reliability in a deck, especially when it has such a balanced matchup spread. So I've been playing pretty much the same list I played in Dublin last week that I used to get top 16, just a one card change.
Yep. I'm taking a different approach. I'm taking more of a targeting things from last week in North America. As a quick recap, like purple, black, and green purple probably did the best in the Florida event we had last weekend. And I think people are over preparing for those decks. So I just wanted to play the Japanese Pokemon of blue purple. I think that deck's super duper powerful. And I think it's pretty well poised to do well in this event, as long as you're kind of preparing for the other purple Luffy decks.
Yeah. I'm also a bit of a blue purple believer. If I were to be in those events, I would definitely be playing that deck. Um, but yeah, I definitely think that at least the sort of sentiment online is that the top three decks are purple black, blue purple, and green purple. So if you're picking one of those, it seems like you're generally in an okay spot, even if there are some other decent options in the meta, such as perhaps Teach, Buggy, for example.
Um, so I kind of want to spend a little bit of time talking about just what last week looked like in terms of like both the Dublin event and the Oviedo one in Florida. Um, I thought that it was a really interesting format and very different between the two nations or the two continents in terms of how well the two decks were performing or what decks were performing well. Green Purple Luffy probably did the best between both events, but I think Purple Black Luffy only really did well in North America. I ended up playing
Mm.
it and I was really happy with it, and my testing partner Kyle ended up getting top 8 with the same deck list, which I'm super happy about. But I'm curious on your guys' thoughts on Purple Black in the first couple weeks of this format? What do you think that deck's like worth playing in the future? Do you think it's kind of a one-off deck? What are your thoughts on it, Kai? At the very least, to start you off.
Yeah, I think that Purple Black Luffy is a very interesting deck in that it has this really explosive early game, lots of tempo, and can just easily topple a lot of decks just by sheer numbers in the early game, which makes it in a way very similar to Belo Betty, except that it doesn't have the weakness of being weak against other aggro decks, which Belo Betty used to have. So in a way, if you are playing an aggressive deck, it seems like the objective best choice because it does better into aggro decks relatively. My thoughts about the deck, though, are that I'm not 100% sold that it's actually or I'm not 100% sold on the fact that it's actually the best deck in the meta, given that, decks like Bella Betty also struggle into certain matchups and just has really good other matchups. The one thing that's weird for me is that, from my testing with Purple Black Luffy against Blue Purple Luffy, that matchup's not as winning as I would have hoped or initially thought that it would be for Purple Black Luffy. So therefore, while the deck is solid, the merits and demerits of bringing the deck are a bit unclear to me.
For my testing, honestly, I already told this to you in private, but I'm not really like understanding of black purple as a deck, or like I cannot find the appeal in it because I don't think it has that good of a matchup spread into like the strongest decks, the basically the other Luffys. But also have this problem where I look at like how I expect black purple to do against some deck in the meta, and then I look at mono purple and how I would expect like just mono purple Luffy to do against that same deck. And like for 90% of the matchups, I'm like, well, purple Luffy is just better into this deck. And then there's a few outliers like green yellow, I would say. And yeah, I think that's the only one where I'm like decisively okay. Black purple should be better here, and maybe Zora. And for that reason, I
Yeah.
really don't like see the appeal to bringing black purple over just mono purple. I think it's the easier deck to play, which is fine to say because mono purple is usually regarded as fairly easy. But yeah, it has a lot of uncertainties about the deck, and I just think it straight up has bad matchups into green purple and Eevee into blue purple that I wouldn't be confident bringing it into an event, and I wouldn't expect, especially as people in NA over prepare for it, to perform well again.
Yeah.
Yep.
I also think that that might be a big factor is that people were, I think maybe for the first regional, expecting perhaps lots of blue purple Luffy and lots of Buggy. And not being really prepared for purple black Luffy may have been a factor for why it performed so well. What do you think, Jonas, as someone who is actually there?
And who
Yeah,
played
I
the
do
deck?
think that yeah, I did play the deck, and I was pretty happy with the performance of the deck, but I also acknowledge the fact that once people are more prepared for the deck, know how the deck functions, and know the deck's built, like, it's a lot easier to counter. Um, it's ultimately just built as a deck that really needs to involve the starter deck Luffy. I've been calling him Beer Luffy recently, the one that makes your leader a 7K. Without that card, your deck's like very, very fragile. And like if your opponent has ways to deal with that card very efficiently, like green purple with electrical Luna or Gamma Knife once it's rested. If you're playing against a red deck that plays Molt Pistol, it's really fragile. And also even against green decks that play cards like 5 cost Carrot, like all those different cards are basically nightmares for the deck to deal with. And even still, there are games, even when you draw kind of the ideal curve, you will be losing some portion of your games against blue purple that draws very well. So I do think the deck kind of has a lot of inherent flaws. But I do think the explosive power from the deck and how aggressive it can be out of seemingly nowhere is really easy to catch people off guard with. A lot of my games last weekend ended in like 4 minutes just because I played the beer Luffy on curve, and then I played a secret Luffy, and then they lost the turn subsequently after. So
Uh,
a lot of people, if you take the deck really fast, can end games very, very quickly. And I thought that was a really powerful thing to do week one.
Yeah,
But yeah,
that makes a
as
lot
you
of
know,
sense
I'm not
from a
playing it again.
medical. Yeah, from medical perspective, yeah. I usually don't like do stuff like that. I just if I decide the deck is the best, I'll just keep playing it until I get bored of it, which is pretty much never. But from Dublin, yeah, we did have different results compared to was it Orlando where the American regional was held?
It
yeah.
was a couple miles north of Orlando. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
But yeah, Dublin, first disclaimer is it was a smaller event. It was 256 players, which it does mean smaller number of rounds and more like variance in what can actually top because it's eight rounds of Swiss instead of 10. But then again, there pretty much every like tryhard European tryhard travel to the event because that's what you try to get tickets for, like the quote unquote easy serial. Uh, but the top cut spread, it doesn't have black purple Luffy, but in my mind, it's not actually that much different of a pie chart because instead of black purple Luffy, we just got a bunch of other like aggro decks which haven't been as represented in NA, but they're still like aggro decks. There was like two green yellow laws, I think one red green smoker, one Calgara even, and I think Belo Betty even topped in America. But yeah, we also had some Belo Betty sneak in there and a slightly higher number of blue purple Luffys. So yeah, I guess the first deck I would like to comment on, which I think it was the most underrepresented for how good it is in this format, is Red Green Smoker. Like, how are you guys feeling about that deck?
So for me, I think the deck is very scary for a lot of decks to play against. I think the combination of just like the red reduction and KOs for like Mo Pistol for getting rid of Sanji puddings, um, and then Hodies to be very aggressive alongside an 8 cost kid is just a really obnoxious web of cards to deal with. And I think that a lot of decks aren't going to be prepared to deal with just like 5 cost smoker, 8 cost kid, and then Mo Pistol in that capacity and that combination. Um, One of my concerns with playing that deck, is your reliance on 8 cost Kid in a lot of the aggressive matchups, like, for example, like green purple specifically, and how much more prevalent the card Gamma Knife has been in green purple Luffy. Um, like, since like, I think a lot of your strategy in that matchup just kind of relies on you sticking the 8 cost Kid and hoping it survives. Um, but when people are playing 2 Gamma Knives, it just feels like a little bit scary of a proposition. But that's just kind of, I'm not expecting everyone to be doing that, but you never know what people might be doing.
Yeah, I think that, Red Green Smoker, at least in Japan, didn't it eventually sorry, it originally started as a deck that plays around the 8 cost Kid, but eventually moved away from it, now kind of focusing on just pure aggression through things like even a Kid Killer to be able to activate your leader effect and whatnot to just really get a lot of damage on the opponent. Um, and that version of Red Green Smoker was very hard to deal with as Blue Purple Luffy, just due to the fact that their leader effect with 5 cost Smoker was just giving them 3 dong magically out of thin air. But the 8 cost Luffy or the 8 cost Kid version for Blue Purple Luffy was not as difficult to deal with, just due to the fact that they gave you a bit more time, and technically the only threatening card within that deck was the 5 cost Smoker. So if they don't have 5 cost Smoker plus Tashigi specifically, then you can just God Thread it, and then you're kind of fine. So it's one of those decks where I think that if it can really commit to being aggressive, does very well into a lot of these decks that are in the pie chart, um, or like dominate the pie chart in these purple Luffys. But it's also very tricky to balance how much of this aggression and defensive capability that you want to actually have in the deck. So it's hard to say exactly how I feel
Yeah.
about the deck.
I'm also like I just think of it as like it's strong because realistically it did get like several cards worth of support in OP11, which was like the Q, Peacock was the sim name, I forget.
Yeah,
It's like Kujaku or
Kujaku, yeah.
something.
Exactly. Yeah.
Uh, and also the Honesty Impact and the X-Drake 2K are all like pretty good cards for facing off against the current meta because it combines that like high aggression with power-based removal, which is something the meta is not very resilient to. Like there's a lot of cost increases, but there's no real protection against power removal unless your deck already has like inherent protection to removal. And yeah, I agree. There's definitely like an element of reliance on 8 cost kid in several matchups, which does like paint like an easy target on his back on how to counter it. But it still feels like the best kid deck in this situation because, as I said, like 2 green yellow low stopped. One of them didn't even run 8 cost kid. It was by Luca. And green yellow kind of feels in many matchups the same. Like you need to drop kid and you spend this full turn not being aggressive and giving your opponent more time to recover their board or prepare their attacks. And you just hope that kid sticks so that you can actually finish the game. And both decks on the opposite end of that, just run for Hody in hopes of like aggressively finishing the game. So, oh no, I still think like Red Green Smoker is probably the main threat amongst decks that do run 8 cost Kid. But then there's also, of course, other red aggro options because I think Belo Betty is like my pick for the third best deck currently in the meta. I'm not sure if you would agree with that, Jonas.
No, I think it's firmly third as the third best deck. I think green, purple, and blue, purple are fighting for first and second, but I think Belo Betty is right on their heels because it's really scary. And it's also like not, I think it's actually slightly favorable into both those decks, especially
Mm,
when green, purple like removes a lot of the Lunas from its deck to be better against blue, purple. So
yeah.
it's definitely this weird like rock, paper, scissors between these three decks and how they want to prepare for the other purple Luffy mirrors, or just the best aggro deck that exists in the format.
Uh, I'm surprised that even with all of the start decks that you guys got, you still have exactly the same OP11 that we had. Because even for us, um, at least towards the beginning, when you guys were in Japan, for example, the top two contention was between Green Purple Luffy and Blue Purple Luffy. We still have to see if that's actually going to remain that way, or if one of them is going to end up defining itself as the best deck within the OP11 meta. But Belo Betty was firmly third place basically throughout OP11, just due to the fact that it had basically an auto win, maybe just we'll say like 70-80% win rate against Blue Purple Luffy, and honestly a very decent matchup into Green Purple Luffy as well. So just having it's very rare for a deck to have a good matchup into both of these. So just even if the other matchups, such as I guess Red Green Smoker with a Cuskid, can be a bit bad, you honestly you take those if you can hit. If you just get lucky and hit all of the blue purples and purple blacks and whatnot on the day. Maybe not purple black, sorry,
Yeah.
green purple.
Like, I think the main expectation with the starter decks was, there's Buggy, he can just drop like the shoe Buggy, and now Betty just cannot attack. Like, game's over. But there have been adaptations made in the deck list to help deal with that. I think the biggest one is that people like swapped out the 2K slots for the 5 cost promo Sabo, which now shot up in price. But there is also more of the low cost units such as Raise Max and Kuma, the 2 cost to get those extra attacks in. Like, it's still a Buggy favorite matchup, but Betty now has like some solid chances into it. It's not like a complete
Mhm.
auto loss. And yeah, as you said, like she's already naturally really good into blue purple, and now it got better because Betty got extra ways to remove like Sanji puddings against green purple. Like they always had the option of like going on 4 Ivankov Limberg, and then on 6 like buff Limberg buff Ivankov, drop Karasu with Ivankov, Koala 6 cost drop like the 2 cost Koala, raise max, and reduce Sanji pudding, then Limberg pops it, and that's where like the game goes like completely falls apart for the green purple side. But now they also have Zeus, and I've also seen some Belo Betty start taking Molgan because with like play Karasu, play Molgan is enough to out the shoe Buggy if they don't have Mihawk Rock out to protect it, and now you can just swarm the Buggy with a bunch of hits. So it's like the deck is adaptive, and I think we'll just see more of that like usage of red and yellow arsenal that it hasn't previously used come to light as a response to the meta we have so far.
I was also seeing a couple lists playing Divine Departure as well as a kind of cleaner answer to Shoe Buggy. It's a clunky card, but I think it's also quite reasonable. And it doesn't defend your board, but it's a pretty decent tool to also defend your life later in the game if that comes up. So
Ah, interesting, actually. Yeah, because in a lot of matchups, you do end up racing the Betty, and she just doesn't have that many defensive capabilities, so she just needs to kind of push back. So having that one Divine Departure does have a couple of decent use cases. That's kind of fun.
Mhm. Speaking of starter decks and Buggy, the deck didn't perform that well in the last two events. Do you guys think that deck is still a very reasonable deck? Do you guys think that's a deck you'll probably play in the future, or do you think it's kind of more of a gimmick? Hrvoje, what are your thoughts on the leader or
Mm.
the leader and the deck?
So only one top 10 Dublin. I know there was like one or two more hanging around the top tables before, or like in the last or second to last round. But I feel like it underperformed. I think the deck should do better, but the problem is, okay, the expectations going into Dublin for most people, like 2 or 3 weeks before, was that blue purple would be the most popular deck, and the meta would shape around being able
Hmm.
to answer blue purple. But as more and more people tested, they realized, wait, green purple is positioned really well. It doesn't have to fear Betty as much. It doesn't have to fear Buggy as much, and a lot of people end up bringing green purple. And I think just that level of extra layer of preparation caused Buggy to fall off because its green purple matchup is it's like really difficult. You can win, but it pretty much relies on you hitting like the perfect curve of having enough 7k bodies and having counters and having blockers. While green purple has a bit of a slower start, or maybe it's a gravity blade because they didn't see a stage, and then you can get to your Tenko safely. But without like all those things lining up, it just feels bad to play against green purple. And in addition, there's like the deck just struggles into purple decks, purple swarm decks in general. Like mono purple, if they play Luffy Taro, it's difficult. Black purple when they go beer Luffy into secret Luffy. There's just so many obstacles for the deck that naturally occur despite its good matchups. But I do believe it's still a good pick. It'll completely like annihilates several popular options such as like well they're not popular anymore because Buggy exists, but like Lucci is pretty much not played at all in our meta. Whereas in Japanese OP11, like the build with Kuzan and Jack
Yeah.
did have some impact because it was like good into or like I'm not sure of the exact percentages, but it was like good enough into blue purple, good enough into green purple. But here it doesn't exist because Buggy plays Miho Krok, and now that entire deck is turned off. But yeah, I think it should see more representation, and it might. So
Yeah. I
What are your thoughts on the deck,
think,
Kai? Oh, good.
yeah. Um, I I think, I mean, as everybody has been saying, Buggy just has some really, really good matchups and some really, really bad matchups, and there isn't too much that you can do about those bad matchups because you're kind of limited to the cross-skilled cards. If you kind of play outside of that, then you're kind of susceptible to removal because your Crocodile and Mihawk doesn't actually protect them. So there isn't too much room for deck building in Buggy like there is in a deck like Green Purple Luffy or Blue Purple Luffy that can adapt to the meta a lot easier. Uh, but the deck is just very solid in general, I would feel, as a system because it's very good. It's very consistent at getting the 10 cost buggy down and very good into aggro decks generically with the shoe buggy. So it has a lot of really good tools for the meta, but as I mentioned, it kind of folds to aggro decks that use things that aren't 3 and 4 costs. So kind of tricky to place it given that it seems like Green Purple Luffy has the sort of top share currently in the OP11 meta. But I think that if you kind of disregard that matchup, it still has a very decent matchup spread into a lot of the other things, making it pretty solid to just, if you get a good day dodging Green Purple Luffy's.
Yep. Ultimately, I would agree. I think that it's just really hard to build a buggy list and just like have a lot of pieces line up to be good against a lot of these other purple decks. I know a lot of people have trying to popularize like stables as like a way too high
Mm.
roll and kind of beat a lot of the green purple leafy draws if you just get that little just like the reprieve of bouncing their Sanji pudding. Even after it's being staged can just buy you a whole lot of time. But it involves having a trigger at that kind of basically the perfect time. Allow like it has to be like your third or fourth life uh, to kind of give yourself back that initiative. So um, I think it's a little bit too narrow, but I also think that um, it's still good into a lot of other decks, like the aggro decks. I think it's pretty good against blue purple as well. But yeah, I think you're just missing a lot. Like too many things need to go right in terms of both matchup spread and also just like your draws being like above average. To be honest,
That deck needs removal, but no. Or it needs removal before 10 costs buggy, but we can't ask for everything. It already has floodgates and anti-removal and, I mean, Exodia in a way, so.
yep.
Deck's still good. I definitely think that another merit for the deck is that it's relatively simple to play in that you're kind of going for a similar game plan every game. And there are some matchups where you don't really have to think and you will end up winning by default. So in these longer tournaments with like 10 rounds of Swiss or something, it's harder to get fatigued on a deck like Blue Buggy compared to a deck like maybe Green Purple Luffy or especially a deck like Green Yellow Law, for example.
That makes sense. I don't want to play green yellow in a 10 round tournament because I think
Yeah.
I'll just, like actually like get too exhausted to play the game. There's too many decisions for that deck.
Yeah. There is, speaking of Green Yellow Law, there was actually a bit of Green Yellow Law in the Dublin regional. I think there were two or three, two in the top 16, and there were none in the Orlando video regional. How do we feel about this deck? Oh,
So
sorry.
I'll give my yeah. Go ahead. I'll give my 2 cents on it. I think the deck is strong. I think a lot of what it's doing is very, very powerful, and it gives you kind of tools to interact with almost any deck and what they're doing, or just being so proactive you can just end the game before what they end up doing even matters. Um, my only qualm with it, which is one of the main reasons why I'll never bring it to a tournament, is I think that a lot of the time you're just doing like complex algebra to get like a 52% win percentage. You're just doing a lot of mental gymnastics and calculations to try to win this game, and you're just barely getting slightly above like 50% win rate. Um, and like we talked about before, like mental exhaustion is a real thing in these long tournaments, and I think that I could be playing a more powerful deck for a slightly better outcome, and do a lot less thinking with deck like Buggy or a lot of other decks that way. So that's my only gripe with it. But I love playing it. I think it's a really powerful deck, but I don't think I'll ever really bring it to a tournament.
Yeah, pretty much in the same boat. I think it's powerful. I think it's surprisingly consistent. Like after the support, but it's kind of like the bull black Rebecca. You're jumping through a lot of hoops to not gain as much as you would with like pretty much any other option. Like the main deck I like to compare it with is Red Green Smoker because it has a similar aggro plan and then like kit backup with Hodi for pressure. But in reality, you're playing Vegapunk. You're playing a 2 life leader because you're gonna take 2 life just to cheat out bodies, and then you're hoping like you don't die because you're not Vegapunk who can like heal and stall the game. You're just hoping to print out enough resources through abusing leader ability that it just gets you there. And the 2 players who topped with with Green Yellow and Dublin, like Luka and Jan, they were both like just playing super aggressively and like ideally finishing games like turn 5 or turn 6 at the latest, because that's why you run for Hodi in the deck and the kid is only a 1-off or a 0-off. Like if you have to play defensively, you're probably not going to win because the long game does not suit you. You just have to take advantage of the additional tempo. So yeah, I would rank, like, in my mind I was always ranking Green Yellow somewhere with Black Purple, like I would say around 10th, at the edge of top 10 decks in the meta. So yeah.
I mean, it's a great meta if we could even talk about top 10. So it's still not the worst, honestly.
One of the other decks I had a starter deck I want to talk about is actually Blackbeard. I don't want to bring it up, but technically Hrvoje did lose to it in top 16. But also, I think it's one of the sleeper decks in this meta. The main problem with the deck, in my opinion, I think it's really, really powerful and has a lot of good matchups into the top decks. It's just really hard to build that deck to be very comfortable against blue purple, especially with all the blue events that are really popular. Um, and against all these like other like purple Luffy decks, trying to figure out the best suite of just like KOs versus like Burgess plans and stuff like that's a little bit difficult. Um, I can't figure out the right list that I'd play in a tournament, but I think there are far greater minds that are committed to Blackbeard that might be able to kind of break the deck in the upcoming meta. Hrvoje, what are your thoughts on the deck?
My stance is somewhat similar. I didn't test the deck as much as I would like, but in my mind, there's like this idea there has to be more to this deck. Like, it has to be better. It has this problem, which is noticeable, that blue does run Gravity Blade. Like, whether it's Buggy or blue purple, if they don't run Gravity Blade, the matchup is actually like sort of tolerable. Like, you can win both, but you have to be able to like adapt to whichever deck you face, not just those two. And then you have to adapt to like different strategies decks can decide to use against you, notably whether they decide to starve you as blue purple or even green purple. I've seen. So yeah, it's just the deck is really difficult to put together and to form a cohesive game plan for each matchup. It's probably the biggest like puzzle piece for OP11 for me. I'll be putting more time into it leading up to the finals, but for now I'm just cruising on Green Purple Luffy because it's easier on the brain. But definitely think there should be potential there because he got some absurd cards.
Yeah, and actually, I think that Blackbeard is one of the decks that's uniquely gotten better in the last week compared to the Dublin Orlando regionals, because I think that at least in the early meta, people were expecting a bit more aggro decks, but they were kind of gated by Buggy, the shoe Buggy mostly, and um, for the Teach matchup and these sort of aggressive matchups, Blue Purple Luffy would have been running Gravity Blade, but because these aggro matchups are a lot less prevalent, Teach isn't as big of a factor to actually consider that much in deck building currently, and Purple Black Luffy is the main thing that people have on their minds. People have been cutting Gravity Blade in favor of things like Red Rock, and therefore Teach actually is in a much better spot because he doesn't have to worry about these decks like Zoro at the very least, although he still has to deal with Green Purple Luffy, but he doesn't have to deal with Gravity Blade from Blue Purple Luffy nearly as often as he had to even just a week ago. Speaking of Teach, though, they need to stop supporting that leader because I hate playing against it. I I hate playing
I
against that leader, and they keep supporting it.
You're not wrong. I think that that leader probably shouldn't get support, or there's not much more support, just because I think it's a relatively unfun leader to play against. Like you're playing these on play cards in your deck for a reason. You want to play them and have fun with them. So kind of having all of them invalidated and honestly just neutered in a lot of situations just feels unfun. So
Yeah. Uh, I'm fine with that deck existing within the game, but I don't want it to be strong enough that you can just play it and be fine into most matchups. It should be like a very specific like meta counter. But right now it feels like it's almost at the point where you could pick it into a lot of situations and you can kind of do well regardless. And if that deck gets any more support, like if it were to, for example, get a black Lucky Roux in PRB02, then you know, then we might have some problems.
The one upside is like they really like the deck isn't lacking good forecast to play with, so them
Hmm.
them pushing forecast slot with so much support is not the worst thing to tolerate because there is already so many good forecasts that it's going to be difficult to find space. But yeah, I agree. It produces the least fun game states and like flows of turns of any deck in the game, and that in that time including like literally everything, like Nami as well. Like Teach is
Mm.
just far less fun to to play against. I'm not saying this because I lost. I lost because my deck did betray me a little bit, and I was attacking with Franosuke's and 2K Sanji's way more than I would have liked. But also my opponent
Yeah.
played really well, so I'm not mad about it. It is just it can happen, even in a good matchup. Uh, but yeah, I might still end up playing the deck for finals, though. We'll see how the testing more in depth goes.
Mm-mm.
Our
If you
finals is
can even
OP12,
join
right?
it. No, our finals will be still OP11 because they are first weekend of August, and American should be OP12, I think.
Oh, okay. I didn't know yours was so soon. Okay, that makes more sense.
Interesting. That'll be really weird to have two very important tournaments in two different formats.
Yeah. There is another deck though that got a starter, and it's seeing a little bit of popularity. It almost topped Dublin because Arman was 17th place with Bonney, which kind of makes sense. Like if you expect an uptick in green purple, Bonney can be positioned to answer it. I actually don't think it's a Bonney favorite matchup unless they see like all the carrots in their hand to completely lock you down. But Bonney does have potential to beat green purple, and its enemy number one is blue purple because it just gets to big bodies too fast for Bonney to deal with. How do you guys have you tested with that matchup? Have you like had any experience going up against it with blue purple? Maybe you, Kai, since you published the massive guide, which I still have to
Uh,
read it, but we'll
yeah.
get there.
Um. Yeah. As you say, Bonnie versus Blue Purple Luffy, just due to the fact that Blue Purple Luffy has the ability to play two 9,000 power characters onto the board, effectively nullifies Bonnie's leader effect after the first one is played, just because the extra 9,000 power attack feels like it shouldn't have been there to begin with. So once you establish the first Sanji, then after that, the more characters that you play, the more free attacks you get into the opponent's 8-cost kid. And just being able to do that early, being able to do that fast, and being able to explode onto the board via 9-cost Sanji makes it so that even if uh, Bonnie can set up a board with 8-cost kid, which against other purple Luffy decks would be the nail in the coffin, against blue purple Luffy, it's kind of just the start of the game. So that matchup is blue purple Luffy favored. My perception was, though, that despite that, Bonnie would have a very, very good matchup into green purple Luffy. So I'm actually surprised that you say that that's not the case.
Gamma knife, like
Gamma knife.
stab them.
Yeah, I tested the green purple Bonnie matchup a lot pre-starter deck, and it wasn't like the worst, even without Gamma Knife. As long as you have the tools to kind of outmuscle the 6K bodies, whether the Cavendish or the Carrot, you can kind of invalidate a lot of what Bonnie's trying to do and still slowly overwhelm them on board. Um, the main issue that comes up is they kind of have like all the early pieces, and they also develop the kid without Gamma Knife. It just feels like it's really hard to pressure them all together. Um, and nowadays with the current format, I do think Bonnie's it's the best anti-aggro deck. Is like the easiest way to think about it. I think especially when people are trying to just play de facto aggro decks, I think that's really hard or really well positioned for Bonnie. The main issue is that like blue purple is like one of the most busted control decks we probably will ever see in this game, and it can never really function there. And as long as people kind of attack properly for Bonnie, it just feels like a really hard deck to play, and people are kind of naturally targeting Bonnie when they're trying to play other cards to beat like green purple and like the other mid range decks with big rested characters. So I'm a bit hesitant on it, but I think the deck is very very powerful and very very obnoxious, especially for people playing aggro.
Yeah, the supported god is actually like surprisingly when my opponent plays two kid killers like early in the game, like first two turns, I'm like, oh, what the hell? Because the impact that like freeing up one don has later on is actually substantial. And the low end Beppo, I thought that card would be a lot worse than it is. But 7k for the turn and locking away a body proactively very positively surprised me at how much impact it actually has because it makes you less reliant on just having the kid, which can by a lot of decks be
Mm-mm.
outed relatively easily,
That's a good one.
especially red decks with power reduction.
Yeah, I actually think that, as you touched upon, the Law and Beppo being a proactive card is very nice for the deck because that deck, historically, although it has a Cascade, which you can technically kind of play proactively, it is still, by design of the deck, kind of reactive to how the opponent wants to play. And the other cards that you generally see in the deck, such as 9 cost Shanks and 10 cost Flamingo, the opponent already needs to have rested their characters for the effects to actually be usable. And this Law and Beppo being able to just grab one of the opponent's characters and not let it play the game for a turn makes it so that Bonney has a little bit more initiative in the game that she didn't necessarily have before. Of course, in the context of Blue Purple Luffy, it means that you can finally actually deal with 8 cost Katakuri because this card was a complete menace in the uh, Blue Purple Luffy versus Bonney matchup prior because it would just restand itself, never giving the opponent an option to 9 cost Shanks or 10 cost Flamingo it.
Yep. I do think that the Lawn Beppo really adds a layer of complexity into how to play against Bonnie, especially in the late game, because it now has like there's no real great answer anymore. Because like if you wanted to play around Shanks, you would just not rest only one character, so your opponent can't get rid of it. So you just leave your characters active. And if you want to play around the 10 cost guy now it feels like you still just want to attack the 10 cost Law and Beppo just because like it's going to get rested anyways by the Law and Beppo effect. But now if you just turn everything sideways, then 10 cost Dofi gets you. So like no matter what, now it feels like whatever choice you do, you just kind of have to play around one or the other. And it really kind of makes things kind of difficult in the late game, depending on what your board looks like and trying to figure out which card you beat versus not.
You can still kind of play around it just because it needs it needs to see two bodies rested for the full effect.
Mhm.
So you could not attack, but how often do you want to not attack is another question. And there's usually the problem that something got frozen by Carrot anyway, so there's gonna be two rested bodies
Yeah.
regardless. But yeah, it's a very, I think, good. Like as I said, a card that positively surprised me. I wouldn't think it would even see play, but then I played against it and it justifies its slot.
Mm-mm.
Are there any other decks you guys think that we maybe should have seen uh, appear in the meta by now, but we haven't?
Uh, Not really, with the exception of Blue Purple. I guess we kind of briefly already talked about it, but it had a relatively lackluster showing in both nations or
Mm.
both events. I mean, it did better in Dublin than it did in Florida, but I think we only had like one in our top 16, um, which was like surprisingly low. Do you think it just had like a really big target on its back and people were kind of over prepared for it day one? Or do you think it's just a different meta and the deck just needs to kind of adapt before it ends up performing very well moving forward?
So I think actually, if we look at Japanese tournaments in OP11, we only had two that were within the OP11 format. But in both these tournaments, Blue Purple Luffy was not in at least the top two. I think one of the tournaments it was number 3 in representation in the top 16, followed by Belo Betty and Purple Luffy. It's a bit of a different meta for you guys, but the thing with Blue Purple Luffy is that because it's perceived as the best deck in the format, everyone's basically going to either play the deck or play something that's good into the deck. And so therefore, even if the deck is generically very powerful, it has some auto lose matchups, like in OP11, especially Belo Betty. If you were to hit this matchup and there were a lot of Belo Bettys, then you would end up losing. So ended up not representing the top cut as much. Even if for example it was a 3v3 tournament, it would probably dominate top cut due to just having the ability to hit Belo Betty and still not immediately lose. So I think that it's this thing where people are overly afraid of Blue Purple Luffy as other decks that they feel the need to bring decks that are specifically designed to counter Blue Purple Luffy, even at the expense of some other matchups. But does that mean that Blue Purple Luffy is not the best deck? I'm not sure. It's one of those tricky things.
I would classify it as like a twofold cause. First thing is, as you already pointed out, Betty is popular, and like I think Buggy is uh, honestly less popular than I would expect. But these are decks which have good like chances into Blue Purple Luffy, and they're very cheap. And I think that brings a lot of like the less practiced players to those decks. Well, if I don't have the best deck, I'm just gonna bring a counter to one of the best decks, and hope matchups get me there. But I also think this is more in NA's case. I think a lot of the potential blue purple players just picked another pick they felt would go better for the start of the format. I mean, you were one yourself, Jonas, but I
Yeah.
imagine there was more people who would have played blue purple if not like for just wanting to get a feeling of some other deck in a serious setting. Because I think, if I'm not mistaken, in NA you still have like 3 or 4 regionals to go before the season is over. Whereas in Europe we already had the bulk of our regionals in like OP10 and EBO2, and now we only have 2 events in or 3 events in OP11. But I think NA has more, right?
Yeah, we have like 3 onlines and 1 in person next month.
Yeah. So like
So we have a lot
when
more events
OP11
for
starts for
11.
you guys, there's this like a little bit more room to take it easier on the first event, I think, and not bring the best try hard pick, because blue purple at worst is the second best deck. Uh, I also think it is by a slight margin the second best deck, but it's a small margin. It's definitely, I think, it warps the meta around itself, and that already means it's the most important deck in the room. Uh, but yeah, in Europe it performs slightly better. I would say all the people I would expect to play blue purple among like the top players have played it, and all the other ones I would expect to be green purple
Mm.
mostly were on green purple as well. Like there's some exceptions, like Harman. I would not have expected to bring Bonney. He's like, I think, top rated European player or second top rated European player by like tops and limitless points, whatever, in last year or so. And I expected him to be a blue purple main, but then he brought Bonney and got 17. But yeah, I expect the deck to rise in popularity. It's just so simply powerful.
I mean, one other factor to consider is that it is very expensive to build. So unless you are very serious about playing the deck and playing it to win, there is always the uncertainty of, do I really want to spend $500 on a deck that, at least by the results so far, have not really proven that it's worth that price? So one of those things that maybe if more people start to win with Blue Purple Luffy, then we'll see more Blue Purple Luffy. And if we see more Blue Purple Luffy, then maybe the deck gets even more expensive, hard to get into, and we have this kind of Ouroboros cycle of not being able to play the deck. There is. I'm just looking at some results of the last couple of tournaments. Yamato got top 16 on Orlando, which was surprising to me. And this Yamato list, if I can pull it up quickly, is basically a standard aggro list, but it does run the 5-cost Momonosuke from way back when, what
Oh,
I think it's
6, I think.
OPS6. Yeah.
OP6. Yeah, alongside the new cards such as the 6-cost Momonosuke, as well as the 1-cost Yamato. Oh, even the 2-cost Easel. How do you guys think that Yamato might be poised in this meta? Starting with you, Jonas.
Yeah. I've been thinking about the deck, and at its core, I just don't see that much of an appeal to playing that deck in a room full of Gum Gum Giants is like my main issue. Um, I think the deck's super powerful, and you can catch a lot of decks off guard and put them low enough where Hody can kill them, and I think that's like one of the main appeals to the deck. Um, but whenever I've tried that deck, even against decks like Purple Black, it was pretty convenient to just be at 0 with a blocker and just leave up 2 Dawn for Gum Gum Giant, and then just continue enacting your game plan. Whether that's with the Beer Luffy becoming a 7K, or if you're just playing green purple with Sanji Pudding and now a 2020 Chopper. It just felt like a lot of these like aggro purple Luffy decks were very easily just able to just live at 1 or 0, try to just like still do their thing, and then just leave a bunch of Dawn at the very end. And it was very hard for Yamato to keep playing. Um, and I wasn't really happy with the deck against decks like Buggy either, even. Just because I thought like all the 7K blockers were quite difficult to deal with as well, and they played a lot of 2Ks. Um, so unless you're like building the deck to be hyper aggro and be as good as possible into exactly blue purple, um, I just didn't really see the main appeal of playing it over a more proactive like aggro deck that puts bigger characters in play instead.
Yeah, very much the same. I think that they got good support. Like all the new cards that it got, the runs are good, but they don't like upgrade the deck to some power level where I think it can reasonably compete. Because yeah, the ISO blocker that is like on Nami also in one card, really good. The Searcher really good. The Rush Momo really good. The 3 cost Ashura that just kills the 5 cost in early stages. Like those are all really good cards. But after all that, I still feel like it's not even the second best green yellow deck. Like I would rate Arlong above it. I'm not joking. Like Arlong got actual support. He's like semi-playable, and if he wants to, he can double attack as well. And then obviously green yellow, I think, is even better than both of those. So yeah, I don't know. I have just a really low opinion of Yamato as she is in the meta right now. Like either needs more Vano support, either a huge meta shift.
That's fair. I think that reject would save her.
100%.
Let's not get there.
But reject
Let's
saves
not
a
go
Yaya
there. Like
legends.
imagine Belo Betty with reject. By the way.
Oh, that'd be terrible. Yeah.
Um, I really like the Wano core. I was actually messing around with like trying to play the Yamato Searcher plus 5 cost Momo and a bunch of other decks, and I think it's not
Mm.
that bad as a way to kind of slow the game down. The extra blocker, the extra life is actually quite good against like green purple and purple black, just to like make sure you slow the game down. Not entirely sure the way I want to build it. I was trying out like a Nami list the other day, where you kind of play a lot of the early triggers, and you kind of get to play the Wano core. It actually didn't feel quite that bad against green purple and purple black. So I'm gonna try experimenting with that one a little bit more, and hopefully that kind of like Wano engine can be playable in other decks as well.
Yeah. Actually, sorry, just to jump in a little bit on that point. You guys don't have the Ace and Newgate start deck, unfortunately, just due to release timing. But 7 costs all in is Wano. So
I'm
blue
waiting.
yellow Nami being able to search what is probably her best card, as well as these other cards that are already in the deck, such as Hiyori and Kikunojo. Really, really nice within that deck, and that's kind of in my OP12 cope at the moment. So yeah, I think that there's a lot of potential just having a new searcher within yellow to find these Wano cards that are varying in power, but the good cards are very good. Is very exciting for not just Yamato, but the future of this whole archetype.
I didn't
Fingers
even
crossed
consider
ends up
that,
being
but yeah,
actually
it makes
playable.
sense. I forgot that starter deck is like we need to get it eventually.
Yeah, I think you guys get it partway through OP12 or something, which is much too late. But
Yeah, might be for my nationals deck. You never know.
No,
you never know.
if it's partway through or like it's halfway through, then it's already after nationals. Because I think OP12 is very end of August or like very start of September. So unless
Yeah,
it
but
releases
then I think the deck
immediately, it
comes out.
shouldn't be legal for finals on
Yeah, it has to
20th.
be pretty close to immediately because
Yeah.
finals is on the 20th, I believe, of September. So it's a pretty fast turnaround. Hmm. Uh, any other decks that you guys want to talk about? We've kind of talked about the main ones I'm interested in.
I think that we've covered the bulk of the top decks as well as the start deck leaders. So if there's anything we want to talk about, it's more just like cope decks, like there was, of course, decks like Newgate or Karagara topping,
I have
which
one,
could be worth talking about. But yeah,
but
Yeah.
go ahead.
I have one where as a server format, I rated her a bit higher, but now that she doesn't perform, I kind of see it why it's slim. Her blue purple matchup is terrible, but in
Mm,
theory, like she can like overrun everything else in the meta. Because she's still like a really good aggressive tempo deck. She completely demolishes Buggy, and against decks like Bonney Smoker, she's just too fast for them because she's a green deck with removal. But then there's like the terrible, terrible blue purple matchup, and I'm not sure if people are going because her green purple matchup is still playable, especially if you can land removal on Sanji Pudding with
Sanji pudding.
Sakazuki if they miss the stage. And your deck is pretty much immune to Electrical Luna because so many things withstand itself. But yeah, I didn't see any representation from that deck, nor anybody like really uh, willing to risk it all with Lim. But I think it might still work. You just have to get lucky and dodge blue purple, which is a very tall ask. And okay, Teach is also rough. So yeah, two
mm.
big obstacles. But I did think there would at least be some showing of the deck in OP11 because it still has so many good matchups.
Hmm. I didn't
Yeah.
really give her that much credit when I tried her out, just because of all things, I think she was also very bad against purple black. But it's not really that relevant of a matchup, so I think it's quite relevant, or it could be relevant to a bunch of other decks. But it didn't really feel like absurdly powerful into those matchups either. It just felt like it was just like okay against green purple, like okay against a bunch of these other decks, but just good against the other like weird aggro decks. So maybe that's just good enough in this upcoming meta, but it seems like just fine.
Yeah, the weird part for me, like she came off of a good OP or rather EBO2 performance because she had several tops in Europe in the last two tournaments, and she won an American regional, I think, online,
Mhm.
or maybe it was even in person, like one of the last events
She
of
won two
EBO2
events, one in person, one online
Mm.
in America.
in America. Yeah,
Okay, yeah. So
like
she had like such a
yeah.
strong like trajectory, and then OP11 comes out, and nobody's even trying her, and that's the part that was puzzling to me because she's still mostly strong. There's just one more bad matchup now, and I think black purple. I guess it depends on how many removal options you run, like Gum Gum Lightning or 5 Sanji.
Oh, even sans that, I just think it's really hard to pressure a 7K leader with that deck. Like one life with a 7K leader and a giant just really stops a lot of even like scary lethals with Mihawk. Um,
Mm, fair.
but I mean, it's not that big of a matchup. It's not even gonna be that relevant. But when I was trying it, it felt pretty lopsided. Uh, but yeah. Um, any other things you guys want to talk about? In the most recent, like Japan stream, I saw they released some EBO2, or is it EBO3 spoilers, or is it PRB02?
PRB02 and one OP or OP13 card.
Ooh, okay, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Aside
Yeah.
from the really cool alt arts in the PRB deck, I know there was like the Uso Hachi's finally getting an alt art. I think it was Lime Juice that was getting one. 4 cost Basil Hawkins. Is there anything else that you
Mm-mm.
guys are excited about?
I mean, I am a fan of alt arts, but I'm mostly a fan of support for old archetypes. So I'm just
That's
excited
valid.
that PRB finally is giving us new cards where PRB1 didn't. So
Hmm.
I like the Jet Pistol alt art, but it's arriving very late. Like they did this with Houndblaze as well. Like it's such a good alt art, and then it arrives far too late for you to play it.
Hmm. Um, what
oh yeah,
I
finger
didn't.
pistol. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, finger pistol.
That's true,
Of
yeah.
all the or of the new cards in PRBO2, which ones caught your eye?
Um sh- Honestly, all of them kind of seem good to me.
Oh, okay.
Like it's one of those tricky things where like all of them in a way seem to fix a problem or support a deck indirectly. And just in general, they're very solid cards for the archetypes that are in question. Aside from weirdly the SR, I'm very excited for all of the cards basically in PRV02.
The
Yes.
ones that
Um,
caught my eye are primarily the green purple support because obviously I'm still in the mood, in the mindset of OP12 comes out. There's Deadman's Game. I'm gonna keep playing green purple for as long as I think it's positioned as the best or second best leader in the game. And then these EBO2 cards, there's the extra searcher, which is modeled like the East Blue Nami from like OP2 or OP3, whenever that
yeah.
searcher archetype of 2 costs was first introduced with a trigger, which is like more consistency options for the deck. But also the 4 cost Luffy Superior is one of those cards that I feel is most like ripe with just invisible power because when you think about how green yellow law plays against a lot of decks and where it gains its advantage, it's abusing 5 cost Bonney to lock a Dawn and deny them one of their power plays for the expected number of Dawn. And then this is a 4 cost card which pretty much does the same, and it's hyper searchable because it's Straw Hat. It's a Luffy, and you can just play it on 4. For example, in green purple mirror, you play this on 4, and you lock your opponent's Dawn, and now they cannot play Sanji Pudding. Or even against blue purple, if they don't have Zorajur on 3 and no ramp, and they go to 5, you can play him as a body that guaranteed sticks and cannot be denied by God Thread. Or even just expecting your opponent to go to 9 Dawn, you play this, and now at best they can play Katakuri. They cannot play a 9 cost. There's like so many potential use cases for that card. I think it definitely deserves the super slot, and I'm just sad that the alt art and the base art are not inverted, because I like the base art a lot
Mm.
more, but I'm gonna have to run the alt art because it's textured and the full art. But that card
Oh,
looks insane to
woe
me.
is me. I have to run the alt art.
Uh,
It's a
Uh,
struggle sometimes when the altar
yeah,
doesn't look good.
yeah. For the listeners at home who can't see the card on screen, the effect for the new SR in PRB02 is that it's a 4 cost 5,000 Supernova and Straw Hat with 1,000 counter. Your turn on play if your leader is multicolored and your opponent has 7 or less Dong cards on their field. At the start of the opponent's main phase, your opponent rests one of their active Dong. In a weird way, basically it just locks one of the opponent's Dong, but gets around if the opponent just attaches all of the Dong onto their characters, or onto their leader, for example. Um, it has, as you said, good timings where you can potentially lock the opponent out of using things like God Thread. But I feel like outside of these timings, most of the time, it feels worse to me than the 5 cost Bonney, which is already only used in Green Yellow Law. So personally, I don't know if this card would actually be as usable in other decks, but being a Straw Hat does make it a little bit better compared to Bonney in that sense.
I think there's a pretty as a counterpoint. I think there's a pretty big difference between stopping a 5 down play and a 6 down play. I think a lot of the power spikes, and just in general in a lot of decks, just like the power level of like stopping a 5 drop is just that much better than stopping a 6 drop. Especially since a lot of decks don't really rely on sixes in this game as much. So
Right.
stopping God Thread, stopping Sanji Pudding, those are just really like pertinent cards or like prevalent cards that exist in the format. And I just am much more scared or of a card that can stop those early threats than I am about like some 6 drop that might be a little bit easier to stop.
That's fair. But I mean, one of the benefits also of Bonnie is that in the late game against Blue Purple, if you can lock one of their donks so that they can't
Yeah,
leave up a donk for a Gum Gum Giant, and this card can't do that. So I guess there's a bit of a trade off there. But yeah, specifically on 4 dong, this card is very, very strong. After that, I'm still not really convinced on the card.
valid.
Yeah. Do you
I
think
think
that this?
the main argument in its favor is that a lot of the 1K slots, like in OP11, here's the one case I like in my deck: Nami because she searches, Frankie because he ramps, and Chopper because he like kind of rams but blocks. And then whatever other 1K I'm including, and there has to be some more 1Ks because I won't care about the total counter count. I really don't care what the card is. And that really annoys me
Mm,
about the current building of the deck. I don't care if it's like if it's vanilla, Usopp, or Green Zoro, or some other blocker. It just I don't feel like I'm gaining value out of that slot. And this is a card that I feel I can finally slot in there and it feels it will have a purpose in pretty much every matchup because the deck is already like centered around playing out 4 costs. So will it be a 4 of? I'm not sure, but just denying opponents 5 cost on curve or their big power play. Like imagine against Shanks, you play this and deny them the Rayleigh or Beckman. It's like it can completely flip the game.
mm-hmm. Sure.
Mm.
Yeah, I guess while we're still on the topic of Green Purple Luffy, though we did touch on the Nami a little bit, the effect is exactly the same basically as the OP03 Nami searcher, but instead of searching a fishman or manfish, I don't know what it's called in English, um,
It's-
on play, it looks at the top 5 and looks for a Straw Hat crew. Oh, sorry, 2 cost 2,000 purple card, 1,000 counter. Uh, look at the top 5 for a Straw Hat crew card that's not Nami and add it to your hand, and a trigger that plays the card. So another purple Straw Hat Searcher, which is at this
no.
point maybe the 4th of its kind. So the consistency of Green Purple Luffy is going through the stratosphere.
And
Yep.
also black purple and all the adjacent Luffy's like
Yeah.
Yeah, the extra searcher I think is a lot, and it kind of adds a little too much to the consistency of a lot of decks. Um, I have been worried about this issue a little bit, and I'm hoping the rotation helps solve a little bit of the issue. But like when your deck is just 14 or 16 searchers and then 8 cards that matter, it just feels like a lot of games get too similar. And I really one of my favorite parts about One Piece is just how dynamic and how different games can be based on just like the variability of draws and how those games kind of play out. And I'm not a huge fan of the premise of decks like Green Purple Luffy, even Purple Black, even though I played it, which are just like 12 cards that search for the relevant cards, and then like maybe 8 to 12 like relevant threats. it's just not that fun to play in my perspective. So
Uh, this card, although, when compared to a card like One Cost Nami, you would prefer for it to be a one cost searcher, but just having more ways to search through your deck to just make your deck as small as possible does kind of lose some of the dynamic nature of the game. So a little bit worried, but I hope that um, these more dynamic decks can still kind of stay on top in a way. Interestingly, Blue Purple Luffy probably doesn't run this card just because it doesn't really benefit that much from searchers, but
yep.
Green Purple Luffy, Purple Black Luffy love this card.
All I'm gonna say, all I'm gonna say, OP03 format. I ran 15 searchers in Zoro, and I'm not ashamed to admit it. It was 4 Buggy, 4 Izo, 4 Dadan,
Oh,
and 3 of the Whitebeard Pirates event. So I'm
yeah,
all for this type of consistency where I can like have a reproducible game plan each and every game. That's exactly the type of thing I enjoy playing the game with, where I can just fully prepare and like just tap autopilot, finish my game. Like in Dublin, I didn't go into time a single round. Maybe I got close against Fabi, but that's because Fabi thinks for 10 years when he plays. So it's his fault, not mine. So yeah, I like when these decks are hyper consistent, and they have been in the game since like the game started. But I can also understand why the repetitive patterns are not as fun to play against, because you pretty much know what to expect. Against Zoro back in OP3, it was like, oh, here comes Marco, and here comes another Marco, and now it's here's SP, here's another SP. Well, like who could have guessed it's
yeah,
coming? But yeah, I'm a fan of the consistency, but I can also understand the other point of view,
mhm,
especially because like Straw Hats are such a they're never gonna stop getting support. This creates potential like what's the word I'm looking for? There's a lot of room to break these
yeah,
cards just because they're always going to be searchable and they're always going to keep getting new cards. So they're already pushing some archetype on searcher so much, doing it in a way that like Zoro did way back when with like Mancos and Wyvern Pirates is better and healthier for the game than just giving infinite searchers to the main cast. But,
Mhm.
yeah.
yeah. Um, one thing about Zoro, the reason why I personally, although maybe this is just personal bias, the reason why I'm okay with Zoro and not okay with Green Purple Luffy is that Zoro's searchers all search different things. So Dadan searches one cost, but the one cost they search events, they search Straw Hats, they search Whitebeard Pirates, and so in this way, balancing the deck and sometimes even looping the deck and knowing what cards you're going to actually see next search was a very unique and dynamic aspect of the deck. Whereas my issue with Green Purple Luffy is that it has now basically four very solid searchers that all search specifically Straw Hats. So it's not necessarily about playing around the cards or understanding the probability of finding certain cards within your next search. You just keep searching through your deck because you're never going to miss a 5 cost Sanjin pudding because that's the only card that you're searching for, basically.
Yep. On a similar point, and it's kind of the same branching idea. When all of the straw hats or all the searchers are straw hat searchers, they're all just like 90+% to find a body, like find another card. And when you have that kind of consistency, I think it's like very, very problematic. Whereas when the lack of consistency amongst the searchers in a deck like Zoro back in OPO3, like Buggy wasn't like extremely likely to hit a card because I think you like played like 10 to 11 cards. Like if you played Dead End, you had plenty of hits, but like also you sometimes whiffed off Izo or the Whitebeard Pirate Searcher. The decks were very consistent back then, so you played even cards like Flamenco or Hereda just to like make sure that you had a bunch of extra Whitebeard Pirate cards. But there was a lot less like there were a lot less or a lot more chances for you to whiff off of a card, which is a lot more significant back then compared to now. But super small. But I think it's a meaningful difference.
Those are good points. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like because the green yellow always experiencing the same thing where now you just have so many supernova searchers, you just chain them one into another until you find what you need. And yeah, that is a different dynamic from how it used to work. But also I guess it's a natural progression of the power creep, or maybe it's the cause of the power creep because games got faster because you can find all the pieces and all the power pretty much
Yeah.
always on curve. Like that's what today's best decks are. Those that will find its power card and keep playing and find have like it's not going to miss a step on the curve. That's pretty much what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, that's fair. Hmm.
Are there any cards that you're particularly eyeing, Jonas?
Honestly, not particularly. It was just mostly the Nami Searcher that was the
Mm,
card that made me the most interested. I was like, "Ooh, there's a bunch of cool things I can do with this," and Purple Black really wanted this card. Um, but aside from that, I think that the Green Luffy is like kind of the card that I'm
mm-mm,
most interested in seeing how good it will going to be. It doesn't feel like a natural four of, but I imagine it's kind of the type of card that if you play more and more of that card, the more impressed you're going to be to the point that it's probably just worth playing for. I can see that being the case a lot of the time.
well then, I guess one card that I'm actually pretty interested in is this Mr. 3 Galdino. It's a 2 cost 1000 cross guild formal baroque, works with 1000 counter, and it's a blocker with it's a lot of text to basically say if the character is rested, you can trash the character instead and draw 2 cards. I think that this sort of we've always had kind of anti KO in the deck, and then eventually to deal with more blue options, we have anti removal, and now we have anti resting, which is kind of an anti green mechanic. And weirdly, I think this card is absolutely terrible within Buggy because it's not 5 cost or higher. But in other blue decks, because it's kind of generically usable, just being a 2 cost blocker with an extra effect is great. And just having in these decks a way to deal with green potentially means that your Olden, for example, is a bit safer because he's also anti-removal but not anti-resting and hitting. So I think that Mr. 3 in general is just a decent addition to blue as a color. Weirdly, every deck probably benefits if you decide to run a blocker aside from Buggy.
I agree. So the thing that was interesting to me about that card is it kind of hints at the idea of them wanting to push like different avenues of interaction in the game, or rather, it continues the trend because in OPO12 there's already a ton of cards which have give me +3 cost, +5 cost, whatever, making it more difficult to remove stuff based on cost alone, and instead of forcing combat based or at least power based removal to come into play, and then this like forces you. It's not like a real force because drawing 2 cards in a lethal shot is like 2 blind cards is not going to change very much in most scenarios. But
Mm,
the idea that they introduce these types of effects does like mean that decks will potentially have to be able to answer these blockers in different ways. Like against Buggy removal wouldn't work just because of the cross guild typing and Miho Krok effect, but you could just remove it. You could find ways to attack with active character into it. Like there's ways to approach it which dodge the effect, but the fact that the effect is there and potentially forces uh, you to find a way around it is like I think a good design decision from Bandai because there has been a lot of like in every set pretty much like pack filler, which was just like the same card printed for archetype number 35,
mm,
where it's like the 2 cost 2k blocker with 1k counter. Like I think every archetype has one of those, and I'm so sick of it because those have been playable in maybe 2 decks since they started printing them. So any type of innovation to make 2 cost blockers better, I approve of.
yep,
I honestly didn't see this card when I was first seeing the spoilers, but after kind of like analyzing it, I think it's a really interesting card. I just don't. Hmm, for the most part, I just view this card as like a 2 cost unremovable blocker. I guess is kind of the easiest way to think about it. And I
yeah,
think that's just fine. Like, I mean, we've seen like Shirahoshi before, like the yellow one, and that card was powerful, but nothing like too scary, to be honest. And I think that's just very, very like reasonable. Like now, but now since like between like the Croc and Mihawk and this guy's effect, no matter what, this blocker is just never going to be removed unless it gets to block. And I think that combination will be super powerful. But you kind of just need to hope this kind of lines up in the right matchup for it to work, I think.
yeah. Just having more options, I think, is very nice. So I approve of this sort of direction that they've been going with PRB02 of kind of increasing the power of older archetypes. I just hate that one of those archetypes that they're increasing the power of is Blackbeard. Um, this card concerns me a little bit, but Hrvoje talking about it a little bit before earlier in the podcast kind of helped me feel a little bit more assured. But it is a 4 cost 5,000 Blackbeard Pirate character with 1,000 counter, and if your leader has the Blackbeard Pirate's type, this character gains blocker and +4 cost. Cringe, by the way. And on KO, if your leader has Blackbeard Pirates, KO up to one of your opponent's characters with a base cost of 4 or less. So Blackbeard's always had this issue of being very good into control decks because it just doesn't let the opponent play the game, but very bad into aggressive decks because he doesn't have the time to really set up his Burgess or his 10 cost teach. This card being able to kind of mitigate some of that early game is definitely filling in some of the holes that Blackbeard had in the deck, which was already pretty solid to begin with. Do you have any thoughts on this? Were either of you guys Blackbeard players? I don't know.
No, I played it a little bit in the OP10 meta. I really enjoyed the deck, and I was playing the OP10 Shiryu, the one that just KOs 3Ks on or 3 costs on play. Um, and for the most part, I think this card is very, very busted because it solves like very specific issues. Um, and like the two things that I'm mostly concerned about is yes, you get to kind of remove characters kind of with the free block, which I think is really obnoxious, especially when your point's going super wide with a deck like Belo Betty. And I think that's just kind of going to be able to solve a lot of issues with the early part of the game. But
Mm,
also, even against blue decks, it solves the Gravity Blade issue. Um, where a lot of the things that you were most worried about is that your opponent just like gravity bladed like your two of your more obnoxious cards that you spend a lot of times developing, and this just being an 8 cost character that it cannot gravity blade on curve or a gravity blade period kind of gives you a lot more assurance in the middle part of the game. And that combination I think is just super powerful. So I'm definitely going to try this card out once the PRB stuff comes out in a couple months. I think it's going to be very good, but I'm not entirely sure if it's even a 4 of, to be honest. I think that it's kind of hard to just play 4 Burgess and for this. And despite how powerful this card is, I don't think the deck will ever gravitate away from Burgess. At least, but
yeah.
maybe this might be a case where the cards are good enough where you don't need to play Burgess anymore. But I don't want to see a world where that's the case.
The one fun thing that the deck has going for it.
What
I
about you,
haven't brought
Hrvoje?
I haven't brought Teach to any official tournaments. I did test it a lot, but it was always either me enjoying some of that deck more or just ultimately being afraid of the bad matchups too much. But yeah, I think like the card is good, but I still think that slot is overloaded. And there is this other problem where I think like Blackbeard kind of has to pick a lane now because he has so many support cards that you cannot like build. Uh, like you need 70 cards, 70 slots in the deck to fit everything you want in the deck. So it's kind of either has to be more move focused or more like aggro slash blocker focused. Small blocker, I mean. And I think I'm actually not sure where this card would even lie. Like, I would be more inclined to put it towards aggro builds, just because the space in like full removal build is more limited. But I mean, maybe the raw power just justifies it. But as you said, if you have to start cutting into Burgess slots, then maybe the deck just got too much support. Because if your 4 cost 12k KO protection vanilla is not good enough for the deck, meta might be going to hell. So yeah, I think it will see play, but I think the slot is too contested. And if you specifically want to deal with aggro decks, Shiryu is probably still your best proactive option just because he's going to be attacking and he's also difficult to remove. But yeah, extra defensive option, it means that San Juan Pizarro and like the 5 cost Katarina Devon are probably never going to be played
Oh yeah.
once he's released. Like it's good, but I'm so far from like getting comfortable with OP11 teach that I have no idea how it's going to develop.
Mm.
We got the
Well,
Lucky Roux as well, right?
yeah.
Like I remember reading the Lucky Roux. I forgot what it does, but I remember thinking like this should have been the starter deck. It was like nothing special, but it was better than the trash that Shanks got in the starter. So
Yeah.
if you want to remind us what it does.
Certainly. So, Lucky Roux is a 4-cost 2000 character with 1000 counter and blocker. On play, you may trash one character card with 6000 power or more, and draw 2 cards. I think,
Oh,
yeah, like this card fixes a lot of Shanks's issues.
yeah.
Shanks is a deck that has a lot of top end and a lot of different top end, kind of similar to Bonney. Um, and the issue was that he didn't have a way to get them out of his hand if it was not relevant to the matchup. So therefore, the cards that he needed to play needed to all be generically decent because they'd be stuck in his hand forever. This card kind of allows you to not only play potentially more top end, but also lets you put in more specific top end for matchups, as you now have a way to get them out of your hand and get a benefit via the 2 draws. Not only that, but even compared to the most easy comparison, the 4-cost Nami in 4-cost Onami, I think, in purple, this card can be used on curve, whereas Onami can't. So I think it's a great card. What do you think, Jonas?
I do think it's a very good card. Um, my issue with the card is that I think that the 4-cost slot is already very hotly contested, and I'm not entirely sure if this is proactive enough. Um, if the Shanks deck is just going to be a controlling deck where it takes the game very slow, I think that this card kind of like is definitely going to be a 4 of just to kind of like smooth out a lot of your draws. Um, but I really liked the OP12 forecast Shanks. I still think the OG Lucky Roux is a very powerful card, and a lot of times to slow the game down, while also dealing with your opponent's threats. So I'm not entirely sure if this is going to be the auto 4 of, despite its very obvious use in Shanks. Um, but I do think it's a powerful tool in the late game, and I think it's probably a very powerful blocker to have in the later turns. So I'm gonna be trying this card out, but I'm just hesitant that it's not gonna be the best 4-drop to play because of specifically the 4-cost Shanks in OP12.
I actually forgot about that card. That's a great card.
Yeah, I'll just restate my initial impression. Like the card was nothing like crazy, but I was like, this should have been in the starter deck. Like I'm glad that they're doing like the thing where they do 2 waves of support. You know, new cards in starter and then new cards in PRB. But with how bad the rest of the starter deck support is, this could have easily been in over the Uta or yeah, or like literally any card
Yeah.
because it does have this level of playability, and we won't get OP12 Shanks for a while. Uh, it's probably like 2 of 3 of I don't know. Maybe it is a 4. Maybe you just late game use it to filter out your hand, stay card neutral because it's an efficient effect, and just ride it out. Uh, but yeah, the deck it doesn't fix actually the other way that the deck can break, which is just like all 2Ks that
Oh,
I think we saw in the finals
yeah.
of World Championship happen twice in 2 games. But it does potentially fix the all top end like 3 Rayleigh, 2 10 cost dragon hands, which are definitely a thing in the deck.
Mm.
Are there any 6K body 2Ks that we can play? Like play the X Drake, the 6/7 vanilla one, or something else to kind of fix it the other way. But yeah, this is slim pickings for like large size 2Ks in red, and most of them
Mm.
aren't gonna be red hair, so
Yeah, it's a bit of a shame. If there was just like, one of those like 5-cost 6000 vanilla Red Hair Pirate 2Ks, that would have been very nice in tandem with this card to fix the other way that it can brick. But yeah, not a bad card. Does fix one of Shanks's big issues. Will it be a game changer for the deck? Likely not, but it will help out in some way. What the last 2 cards that we haven't talked about within PRB is the Bonney and Otama. I think that the Bonney effect is actually very nice because recently Bonney lists have been reverting back to Rouge, and this card is basically just Rouge for 3 dong, and that's very significant as it means that you can play it off of 8-cost Kit.
yep. Um, yeah, I think like the Bonnie, just for people listening and not seeing it, is
Oh,
a 3-cost 3K power supernova and Bonnie pirate with 1K counter. Like Kai said, she's a blocker. But the main distinction is on opponent's attack. Once per turn set up to one of your Dawn cards is active. Um, I do think in most contexts it's going to act as a cheaper Rouge. But at the same time, I do think there are a lot of situations where you might get caught off guard, or your opponent can leave you off guard by getting rid of your Bonnie. If your opponent removes the Bonnie before attacking, you're not going to be able to get that extra Dawn in certain scenarios unless you have a Don up already, or if you have like 2-cost Kid Killer already in play. So it's not exactly a Rouge, but for the most part, it's just going to be very similar. So I think it's
Mm.
mostly an improvement and a very powerful blocker as well. Yeah.
Avoid doesn't seem too sure about the card. There's one thing
No,
though. Oh, go ahead.
I'm just thinking like people used to run the
Dellinger.
Dellinger or something like that was
Mhm.
Mm,
the Donkey Kong Pirates one with pretty much the same effect. Was he? I don't remember if he was even a blocker.
he's
Probably
not a
was.
blocker.
Oh,
Yeah,
he's not. Okay, yeah. Okay, so this is just a strict upgrade to that. I also don't mind the fact that you have to front load the not front load, the opposite. You have to like back load the Dawn restand with this and potentially Kid and Killer, just because
mhm,
you still know to expect it from Bonnie, but it does give like Bonnie technically more freedom with how she goes about and plans her turns, especially in face of like Hody and in OP12,
yeah,
Dead Man's Game, which both it basically cards like this allow Bonnie to catch up with the times and not just get blown out by all this Dawn resting support that comes out. The ST26 Chopper is another example.
right.
So yeah, it's just a good card, and I completely missed that it was playable off of Kid, but that is actually very relevant compared to just running Rouge,
Yeah.
because Rouge never attacks realistically.
I hated Eruge in that deck from day one, but I'm glad that we finally have a reason to take it out of the deck. Yeah, and as you said, I wanted to mention the thing about Hody as well. Just being able to make it very awkward for the opponent to play around your Dong, basically guaranteeing that you can get your leader effect off if you have this Bonney, even if the opponent plays 7-cost Hody. Very nice for the deck. So I think in general, it's a very solid upgrade to the Bonney deck. And the Bonney deck is close to being meta right now, so it could be relevant.
Hmm.
Uh, should we go over? I guess we might as well because it's the final
Might
card.
as well.
But
Yeah.
this
And
Otama,
she's the
I'm
goat, the goat.
a card that I'm not exactly sure how I would really rate, but it is a 2-cost 0 power card with the type Land of Wano, counter plus 2000, and activate main. You may rest this character and add one card from the top of or bottom of your life to your hand, and up to one of your leaders or characters gains plus 3000 power during this turn.
Hmm.
Um, is this Black Yellow Luffy support?
It
For
is
the
a
worst
pretty
matchup as
decent.
well. For the worst matchup as well. Like if we had this against Teach back in my day, poor Moon would be the limit.
Um, I do think this card's
I,
actually better than it reads, though.
Hmm,
Um, there are a lot of tools or like situations where this kind of effect might come up. I mean, inherently, yellow decks tend to be starved more often than not, just because the potential of triggers. And then being able to get that extra resource is very useful. Like getting that extra value off of this card that your opponent also might need to attack because of future attacks is very obnoxious. Um, but even more so, I think one of the best parts about this card is this anti-starving effect with the leaders that care about it. Um, Having this card when you're playing a deck like Blue Yellow Ace or like BY Luffy seems very interesting. I'm not entirely sure if Blue Yellow Ace is going to be playable enough, but this kind of card to get this repeatable effect seems like very good in my head. So um, I want to try this card in a bunch of different shells. The power level might not be there, but I think it has a lot of potential homes that I want to try out.
yeah. Another thing to note though is that the 102Ks in yellow are pretty lackluster aside from Hiyori. Hiyori's a very decent 2K, but the other options that we have are things like the other Hiyori, which is just to give your Wano leader or character plus 1000 power. Uh,
There's
we
a
have
five
the
cost
new,
Yamato.
yeah, the 5 cost Yamato, which is, a lot of fancy things, but no one's ever actually run that card. The 4 cost
Mhm.
Kiyamo in the most recent Yamato start deck. All of these cards that are okay, but not necessarily great in yellow generically. And this card, as we were talking about before, even things like blue yellow Nami with the Wano package, just having decent Wano 2Ks that are not Hiyori kind of opens the door to some other options as well. So in general, not a bad card, but for me personally, it's not going to change the game in a way like the purple Nami might have.
What's the typing on Zeus?
Zeus
Is he
is
just Charlotte or
homies,
Big Mom Pirates? Or,
homies and Big Mom Pirates.
okay.
Yeah, yeah. No, I
Very
thought
cool.
he was Wano for a second.
Yeah, the only deck I really thought this card might fit into is Blue Always. But you also already went over it. Like you have that card in life, you want to do something with it. There's niche applications for other aggro stuff just to get cards out of life, especially with like red yellow Sabo if you're being starved to get those reuses. But yeah, the fact that it's a recurring threat that they have to deal with on the board is potentially going to make your job easier. And plus 3k is nothing to scoff at. I really wish we had this in BY when it really would have mattered, but I'm sure it will pop up somewhere eventually because it's effectively muck. Even you can just use it to buff up your all-in attempt, like something that you can set up preemptively and burn away your life, kill the guy.
Yeah. I mean, and I guess speaking of BI Luffy, OP13 is rumored to be focusing around the three brothers, and we've so far seen exactly one card, but this one card I think is uh, a little bit strong. It's a 1 cost 1000 card with plus 2000 counter named Ace, Sabo, and Luffy. The type is Goa Kingdom, I think that would be in English. Sorry, I'm reading the Japanese text and translating as I go. But activate main, you can attach. Sorry. Activate main, you can attach an active dong to a leader or character and put this card into the trash. Then one of the opponent's characters gets minus 2000 power for the turn. So we have Gordon with 2k in a weird way.
I'm
For
not
my
sure it
side,
has a
I
home.
think. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm not sure it has a home right now, but it is like as in a deck that doesn't have a use for like the first 1 or 3 Dawn. This is a piece of setup you can just abuse. Like red purple would have loved this compared to having a ton of non counters in Gordon and Raise Max. Like you just play one of these on 4 and then use one of your active Dawn that you get back from Kid after using leader. I guess that's the wrong way around. You have to use this and then use the leader.
Hmm.
Uh, yeah, actually, maybe it wouldn't even have been that good in red purple if you had to stick to curve. But it does present the idea of Gordon, or well, not Gordon. It costs 2, and costing 2 makes it compete with 2 cost cards unless you are developing it separately from using its effect. But
Yeah,
I guess having a 2k with that effect, like Koala already has the Belo Betty already has the 2 cost Koala, which is straight up minus 3k
right.
for 2, and you keep the 3k body, which can later attack. I don't know, like
Mhm.
it reads like lukewarm. I'm not terribly excited about it, but I also need to see what other support there will be because
Yeah,
maybe power reduction is the theme.
I definitely
Um,
think I didn't consider the koala comparison, but I do think that this card is, I mean, in aside from Bella Betty being able to make koala an attacker, just very solid card in general because you can, though it does technically cost 2, you attach one of the dong, so you still get the value out of one of the dong by being able to hit the opponent. And a deck that can actually utilize this one dong very well is a deck like Red Blue Marco, for example. With this one card and 2 dong, can minus 5000 power. So there are some very interesting things that you can do, though a deck like Marco is a bit niche currently.
yeah, I think Red Blue Marco is the most natural fit for the card. I think that card alongside like 5 cost or 7 cost Newgate or just like other KOs like Seaquake or something like that will be very interesting. I'm I want to do sillier things because this is like one of the few times that you can get this minus 3k effect from trash. I was wondering if there's like any other combinations that can bring this card repeatedly and kind of abuse it. Whether that's like OP01 Uta. I was like always wanted to bring that the 4-cost one that brings back 3 or lesses. I want to do something with that. But it's probably just not worth it. But or just like other black decks that might be able to reanimate it for cheap. I wish we had Moria still, but
Mm,
I want to see if there's something we can do alongside that line because this is kind of one of the first minus 3K effects that we've had. That goes to the trash. So
mm,
super small, but I think the cost of being 2 is probably a little too much. So I'm
yeah.
not super optimistic about it. But I think this is going to be a very flexible 2K. This all in all, I think it's just going to be better than a lot of what we can play in other decks.
Yeah, that is fair. And as it reads one cost, it is also searchable off of Dadang, which is nice for some of those decks specifically.
Oh, and for the flavor, oh, that's a flavor win. I didn't even
Yeah.
consider that.
Yeah.
That's huge.
Yeah. So I don't think that OB13 we have only seen one card, but it does seem to be focusing around these three pillars, so we're probably going to see much more support and ways to play around this card. But exciting times, and maybe they'll find a new way to make Black Yellow Luffy relevant finally, even without Moria. So here's hoping to that.
Yeah, give me my broken leader back.
Please
Uh,
no.
All right, guys, that's it for today's episode. Thank you for watching the Obul podcast, and thank you for all the nice feedback that we are receiving also in person and online. We do have a Twitter account, the Obul. Make sure to also check it out and follow for updates on new episodes and later Spotify releases. And I hope you have a nice day. See ya.
I'm still
Bye.
working on the Spotify release. I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.